Hi, Carol from Mount Vernon Sewing, and we are going to talk today about paper piecing, or otherwise known as foundation paper piecing. We are going to talk first of all about how to prep your pattern, how to print it, how to do your own, the ways that you can, products to use to paper piece. We are going to talk about actually the process of paper piecing. We're going to talk about removing the paper and how to piece our parts once they are paper pieced. So let's get started. The first part of learning to paper piece is how to prepare your pattern. You may have a pattern that you printed off the internet. There are lots of free paper piecing patterns on the internet. It may have been in a book. You may have a pattern. And oftentimes we have to print that pattern on whatever the product is that we're going to use. So let's just talk about the products that are available first. I'm going to have here today a Carol Doak foundation paper piecing paper. It's not my favorite. It is probably the cheapest to use. It's a thin paper that tears off easily. So the first step is to use something that's going to be easy to remove, because that is actually the pain in the if paper piecing is you have to remove that paper. So Carol Doak paper is thin, it tears easily. I don't like it because I can't see through so easily. My favorite product is a product called vellum paper, which I actually can't get right now. It's back ordered. It is a thin translucent paper that folds easily, tears very easily. I will tell you, however, the vellum paper that you get at like Staples or an office supply store is much heavier than what you will buy from your local quilt shop, which then becomes a problem sewing that. You can also use, some ladies don't want to spend the money on product and they use plain printing paper. That becomes bulky and a little bit of a problem to use. If you're doing paper piecing that has lots of little pieces that you're going to have to remove the paper from, there are wonderful water soluble products. So you would paper piece your pattern with your fabric, and then when you're done, you put that in water and it just dissolves the pattern away, so I don't have to individually tear every piece of paper off. So lots of products out there, different brand names. I'm not going to really talk about the brand names because there are a lot out there, but those are some of the things that you want to pay attention to. Now, as far as your pattern goes, if it's in a book or a pattern piece, and if it's a large pattern, like if you look at my palm branches up here that I'm going to be doing, they don't fit on an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper. Most paper is 8.5 and 11. You can get 11 by 14 foundation paper piecing paper. You'll have to just see what you can find. But a lot of times the whole pattern doesn't fit on one page, or it's going to be a small pattern in a book and it'll say increase at 200%. All right, so the first thing I'm going to tell you that is important is when you are printing your pattern, to make sure that your printer is not in fit to page, or when you take it to Staples or wherever you're going to get it printed at, that you tell them not to fit it to the page. Ask me how I know this, because I was doing a pattern one time, and when I went to put the pieces and parts together, they didn't go together, and the lady at Staples said, oh, well, it didn't fit on the page, so I shrunk it. Some printers, the default is fit to page, so you do not want to have fit to page, because that's going to change the size of your pattern. The other thing that you have to think about when you're paper piecing is that we are going to paper piece from the back side of our pattern. So here's my pattern, but I'm going to actually be paper piecing from this side. So that's the reason I want a product that I can see through to make sure my pieces are fitting. So if I'm stitching from the back side of my pattern, then if I have a non-symmetrical design, then it needs to be printed in reverse. So here's just an example of a free camel on that I got from the internet. And if I want this camel in my pattern, in my quilt, to be facing to the left, then it better be printed to the right. It's going to be reverse. So that's the two things that you really have to think about. If they're symmetrical, like my palm branches up here, it doesn't matter. Or like my square in a square, it doesn't matter. Okay, so just think about how you're printing, what direction the design needs to be, and you need to think these things through ahead of time, and then making sure that the pattern is printed to the right size. The nice thing about paper piecing is that I can easily change my pattern to whatever size I want. I can actually draw my own design. I mean, you take a square and a square like this, I can sit down on a piece of paper and just draw that. One of my favorite resources to use, however, is Electric Quilt. It is a wonderful quilting program that has hundreds of built-in blocks, but I can create my own blocks. And then by the click of a button, I can tell it to give me rotary cutting patterns. I can tell it to give me template patterns, or I can tell it to give me foundation paper piecing patterns. So another resource that's very nice to use for paper piecing. For those of you that have not paper pieced at all, the beauty of paper piecing, if you look at my palm branches up here, is that I can get absolutely perfect points. I can get shapes that would be kind of frustrating using templates, but with paper piecing, I am just stitching on lines and I can get perfect points and perfect shapes and characters that I can put into my quilt. So there are pluses. A lot of ladies have a love-hate relationship. They either love paper piecing and they convert every block that they make to paper piecing, or they don't like it and they will not go anywhere near it. But there are pluses and minuses to paper piecing. So let's get started with paper piecing. All right, so our first step is, once we have our pattern printed, is to figure out if I need to combine the pieces. So remember, this one was on one page, so it's not a big deal. I do want to point out here that usually the dotted line is a cutting line and the solid line is the sewing line, and then it gives me the order that I need to paper piece, which we'll get to later. So if you look at my palm branch, it's 12 3/4 inch finish, so it didn't fit on one piece of paper. So you can see it printed on 4 pieces of paper, and I need to then combine those pieces together. So here is 1/2 of my palm branch. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to tape. So I cut on one line. I just use Scotch tape. And I'm going to line up. It gives me cutting lines, piecing lines, and I can line up that template exactly how it's supposed to be. I try to put my Scotch tape, I try to put my Scotch tape where I won't sew through it. Sometimes I cannot help it. I want to make sure all my sewing lines are lining up, because if you look at remember in my palm branches, I have a lot of points that are coming together. So once I've taped all of that together, here would be the first half of my palm branch. I do want you to notice on the pattern that the left and right palm branches came printed in 2 halves. You cannot always just paper piece a whole block depending on how the pieces go together. So that's our next step, is putting our paper pieces together. All right, now I want to talk to you about some tools that really make paper piecing a lot easier when you're trying to do this process. The first thing is you're going to do a lot of cutting and ironing. And if you tell yourself that you're not going to press every time, your paper piecing is not going to be successful. So it's very helpful to have some type of cutting surface and some type of ironing surface right beside your machine. That will make this process a lot less frustrating and easy. The next tool that I really like is, this is known as an add a 1/4 inch ruler. There's a lot of variations of it. You can actually use just a ruler with a 1/4 inch edge, but you won't be able to see this, but there's actually a lip here that folds against your paper and allows you to cut your seam allowance perfectly. They come in different sizes and colors. Here's a short version, but we can see that my paper piecing is going to be long. So I'm going to use the long version today. The next thing that's nice to have is a rotary cutter, a glue stick. Water-soluble glue stick makes paper piecing a little bit easier. You can pin your pieces, but I find that the pins get in the way. This is not my favorite. It is the purple, which always freaks me out when I put that on my fabric, but it does go away clear and it does wash out. So some type of a glue stick. Tip on your glue sticks, store them in your refrigerator, and they won't dry out. I like to have also something that I can use to fold my pattern on. So template plastic works well, something that's firm. You can use manila folder paper, anything that's just heavy that you can get a straight edge. Again, I have a long strip because I'm going to be folding long. It's not absolutely necessary to use this, but it is a feature that helps with your folding. The other thing, I said rotary cutter, mini iron. Okay, sewing machine. Because we're going to be sewing on those lines, You really want to have a foot that you can see those lines clearly. So any kind of open toe foot that you can see where you're sewing. You're going to want just any sewing machine, preferably a sharp needle. It's going to get dull because we're sewing through paper. A neutral thread, probably a value that's going to be with your fabric, because when we tear that paper off, it could loosen the stitches. And I like to set my sewing machine to shorter stitches. If a lot of you sew with what I would consider a longish stitch, and if you're using that and you're pulling paper off, it's going to pull your stitches loose. So I recommend getting your stitches a little shorter than you would piece with normally, so that when you tear that paper off, your stitches don't get distorted or come loose. Okay,